Hello, class. These are our area and circumference of circles notes. So today we're working with circles, and this is for informal geometry. So first, a quick little review of a circle. Our center is a point that's in the very middle. So by definition, all of the points around the circle are equidistant from the center. So that means my distance here is the same as my distance here all the way around. And that distance is called the radius. So the radius is from the center to the outside of the circle. We also have the diameter. Diameter is all the way across the circle. So the diameter is going to be twice whatever the radius is. And the radius is going to be half whatever the diameter is. So that's just a good thing for us to remember. For our first formula for circles, because this is just something we kind of know, hopefully, is area. And so when I talk about area, I'm talking about like how much it takes to cover something, right? So usually we look at like little square tiles. Obviously, square tiles won't fit very well in a circle, but we're still thinking about covering it. And my area of a circle is going to be pi times my radius squared. So remember, pi is approximately equal to 3.14. I'm going to be using a pi button on my calculator to do all my calculations today. So my calculator actually has this pi symbol on it. So when I press the pi button, it gives me pi's approximation, 3.141592. So remember, pi goes on and on forever. It is an irrational number. It doesn't end. But using this button on my calculator is a lot faster than putting in 3.14, and it's going to be more accurate. So if you're not using that, if you're just using 3.14 instead, our answers are going to be a little bit different today. And that's okay. I just want you to know that that's why you might not get the same thing. The next formula is for circumference. So circumference is a fancy way of saying perimeter when we're talking about a circle. So circumference is our distance around. And there's two ways to write our circumference formula. It could be circumference equals pi times our diameter, or circumference equals 2 pi r. So we use either one of these. I tend to use the top one more, but sometimes they give you a radius, and so you might use the bottom one. So let's go ahead and do some math. So here's my circle for the first one. They're giving me a radius. My radius is 6. That's what they have labeled here. So my area formula is going to be pi times my radius squared, which means pi times 6 squared. So remember, 6 squared means 6 times 6. It means I'm multiplying two sixes together, and 6 times 6 is 36. So this is 36 pi. So my answer with the pi symbol in it is going to be 36 pi centimeters squared. And then rounded means instead of using that pi symbol to actually multiply that out. So that means I want to take this pi number that my calculator gives me and do times 36. And that gives me 113 point. And then because this is a 9 here, I'm going to round it up to 1. So 113.1. So we're just doing one decimal place here, centimeters squared. So I could write it as with pi. This tends to be how mathematicians like it because we don't like rounding. It's more work. But this would what that actual answer would be. So this isn't a real useful thing if you're going to go by like carpet or something, right, to cover a floor. We wouldn't say 36 pi centimeters squared. This would give us a better idea of what we're looking for. So there's good uses for both answers. So for circumference, we need to take pi and multiply by our diameter. So if my radius is 6 over here, that means my diameter is going to be twice that big. It's going to be 12. So that means pi times 12 or 12 pi. And because I'm just looking at my distance around, it's just centimeters. This one's not going to be squared. And then if I use a calculator and multiplied 12 times pi, I would get 37.7 centimeters. So I'm kind of showing a little bit of extra work here. I'm kind of jumping from here to the centimeters squared when really I could just write centimeters squared there. But I think extra work is okay. It's when we don't make enough work. So on the next one, they're giving me a question where I'm given a diameter of 16. So that means, let's remember, my radius is only going to be half that amount. So my radius would just be 8. So now that I've got those numbers identified, area is going to be pi times my radius squared. So in this one, that's going to be pi times 8 squared, which is 64 pi. So that's 64 pi inches squared. And then if I go ahead and use my pi symbol on my calculator and multiply 64 times that 3.14 and round it, it should be 201.1 inches squared. So circumference on this one is pi times diameter. So now I'm going to use the 16 instead. So that means pi times 16, which is just 16 pi. And so my circumference with the pi symbol in it is 16 pi, and units here would be inches. So this is just a distance, so this is not squared. And then if I multiplied 16 times that 3.14, my decimal version would be 50.3 inches. So for the last two, and you are going to have to add a problem onto the back of your notes, but for the last two, we're going to look at doing some solving instead. So they're telling me about circumference. I want to find r. So I want to have circumference. So circumference formula is pi times my diameter. And this number right here is going to be my circumference. So instead of c, I'm going to put in 60 pi. And then on the other side of my formula, I have pi times my diameter. So if I'm solving for my diameter, I am dividing both sides by pi. That means 60 will equal the diameter. But what they're really wanting here is radius. So if my diameter is 60, that means my radius is going to be half that, which is 30. And they don't give us units here, so I'm just going to say 30 units. So whenever we're not sure, you could just write units. And that works also if I'm doing an area, I would just write units squared. So be really careful that you don't just stop here at the diameter, that you read that problem, you know what they're looking for. So we are going to write in one problem on the back. So on the back of this, I'm going to draw a circle. And I'm going to label the radius r again. And given that the area of a circle is 380.1 meters squared, find the radius and diameter. So on this one, they're telling us to worry about area. So let's think about our area formula. So my area formula is area equals pi r squared. So instead of the a, instead of the area, I can put in this 380.1. And then my only variable in here is r. So pi is something I actually know. So I'm going to divide both sides by pi. So I'm going to grab my calculator and I'm going to put in 380.1, and then I'm going to divide by pi. So that's giving me, like, this is awfully close to 121. Like, look at all these. I've got this 989. Like, when I round it, it's going to be 121. So on my next step, instead of this 380.1 divided by pi, I'm going to write 181. And then over here, pi divided by pi is just a 1. We're left with r squared. And so we haven't solved a lot of equations like this year. But when I have something that's squared, what I need to do is I need to square root both sides. So if I have a square and a root, I'm just going to have r. We're not going to worry about negative answers here because we're looking at a circle. And the square root of 121 is 11. And that's because 11 squared equals 121. So the square root of 121 is 11. So 11 is going to be the length of my radius. So my radius is 11 meters, and diameter, because they asked us for both, the diameter will need to be twice that, so the diameter is 22 meters. These last couple where we're solving, I think, are a lot trickier today, especially with that pi symbol. It's a little bit weird trying to get around that. You could just use the 3.14, but it is going to be easier if you do have a symbol on your calculator. So as always, make sure you're asking for help in class.